Yeah, I don't know if so. You think that AIPAC had something to do with Kennedy or Israel?
I think Israel certainly had a lot to do with Kennedy.
Really?
Yeah.
How so? I don't think AIPAC. I don't think there's
not AIPAC.
AIPAC
Just
didn't become
Israel
powerful until the 80s.
Just the Zionists in general, just the Zionist cause. Like, this is during the most important time in Israel's history. Israel has just been founded, and they have just started stealing they have just stolen nuclear material from the United States, from NUMEC, and they are building nuclear bombs. And from the Israeli perspective, they're a new state that was literally founded by organized crime, along with Rothschild banking money, along with a bunch of paramilitary groups that were later classified as terrorist groups because what they did was so atrocious. That's how they founded it. And so they were in this really precarious place where it was not a far stretch for things to turn on them and the international community to be like, this is so messed up, guys, you got to stop, or for like an Arab war to break out and them to lose. And so their success was in no way guaranteed at that point. And they had realized, like probably from the very start, that if we had nukes, our survival is pretty much guaranteed. And we got to get nukes. And so they, within the Zionist circles, they started talking about that. We don't know for sure, but it seems as though they've been talking about that for quite some time. And they started this NUMEC operation, and they got nuclear material and started building the Dimona nuclear facility out in the desert. And Kennedy was extremely vocal about wanting to go there and inspect it and shut down any nuclear program that they had.
Where was this?
In Dimona. It was
Where's that?
It's in the deserts in Israel.
Okay.
I'm certainly not a geography guy.
Right.
But yeah, it's just kind of like middle of nowhere desert. And it was funded largely by the Rothschilds, along with this really famous like Jewish Zionist like actor, celebrity actually, that just had a lot of ties to organized crime in America. So again, it was basically funded by the Rothschilds banking money, organized crime collectively raising a bunch of money in America, and France actually did a deal with them that gave them like a bunch of the technology to build the reactors and stuff, because France wanted something in Africa and Israel. It's kind of complicated, but so they had just essentially acquired the ability to build nukes, and they were building nukes, and Kennedy was like trying to shut it down. And that is essentially, at that point in Israel's history, that is an existential threat to the entire existence of their state, because not only would they lose their nukes if he had succeeded, but that then becomes condemnable, right? Then you've just been caught stealing nuclear technology and doing secret nuclear proliferation. So you don't just like go back to square one. You then might actually, that might be an existential threat to your nation as well, because then the international community could turn on you. So that is circumstantial, right? That is just sort of like the motive. But there's also a lot of Zionist ties to a lot of the people that sort of like the organized crime elements. And I'm not saying it was all Israel by any means. I'm just saying that there are fingerprints of Israel, and there's a lot of motive and means. And LBJ, who came in afterwards, was rather friendly with Israel. I don't know if there's any smoking gun in any way. And I think that I've seen people sort of like present the story as though they have a smoking gun. And I'm not so sure. I've not vetted that stuff for myself. I don't know, but I highly suspect that they had a hand to play, because clearly it was more than one party. It was at least some CIA assets involved, some kind of mafia, mob, like organized crime assets involved. LBJ was probably involved. So yeah, there's a lot that was going on behind the scenes and leading up to in the years and the months and weeks before the JFK thing. And there was clearly, according to John Newman, a lot of coordination between CIA and FBI. Not just because, well, one of the main reasons was because there was a two-time communist defector on the route in Dealey Plaza that had been a week before he was shot. They took off the flash stop on his FBI file. So there was a guy named Giesling, John Giesling, who was an FBI agent who was in charge of tracking all of Oswald's activities in New Orleans. Yeah. And there was this thing called a flash stop on his file. So meaning that essentially when this thing's on your file and you're on, and there's a president speaking in public and you're anywhere near that, that's like, he equates it to being a flea at a Lysol convention. He's like, there's no way you're going to fucking be there. Yeah. And a week before, the FBI removes the flash stop
from his file.
Yeah.
And so, and then when it comes to the CIA, there was another lady that he actually interviewed, which I think is probably the biggest smoking gun that the CIA was involved with. This lady named Jane Roman, who was a CIA officer, and she was a liaison to the Mexico City desk when he was in Mexico City. And Mexico City called up CIA. They're like, yo, there's this guy who's trying to defect. What's the deal with this guy or whatever? And they were like, oh, we don't know. We don't have any new information on him since 62. In 62, he was still in the Soviet Union. And Jane Roman, who was the CIA officer who signed off on this thing saying we didn't know anything about 62, she also signed off on another document claiming that there was a flash stop on him 2 weeks before he was shot. So when John went and met up with her, he's like, Jane, you have some fucking explaining to do here. And he says she smiled at him. This was like right before she died. She goes, it's indicative of something that was being held very close to the belt about Oswald that was only on a need-to-know basis. Yeah. So if the Mossad or if Israel was somehow involved in this, they would have had to been working directly with the FBI and the CIA and the fucking military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who didn't want Kennedy there because they wanted a nuclear apocalypse. They wanted to nuke China and Russia. Yeah. And Kennedy in 61 was like, fuck no, you guys aren't doing this. And then he started talking to him behind the scenes.
Well, in some ways, Mossad has been working with CIA from the start. Like Angleton has been like, they tied that shit together early on. But to clarify, I'm not saying like Mossad assets were necessarily on the ground in any way that day. What I'm saying is that Israeli interests were heavily aligned with the operation. And there's a lot of evidence that they used some mafia mob assets in the operation. And mafia and mob at that point were basically all one thing, like Jacob Rubenstein. The mob basically took over the mafia long before that. Like Meyer Lansky is famous for creating the National Crime Syndicate, Murder Inc. evolved out of that. And that was when the mob and the mafia basically decided like, all right, we should probably work together. It'll be better, right? So it's now the Jewish mob and the Italian mafia. And certainly there was still a lot of Italian power bases in there, and they controlled a lot of that. But like the way I kind of look at it in the short form is one of them got a country. Like one of them literally founded a country, Israel. And the other one is sort of like relegated to obscurity now in Hollywood movies. And, you know, they're active in Sicily. And I mean, they're still active in the United States too. But the mob took over an immense amount of power there. And I think that we all call them the mafia all the time. And we think of them as like the Italian mob mafia. But like the Jewish mobsters had a lot of power. And Jacob Rubenstein was a Jewish mob asset.
To be completely honest, I had no idea the difference between the mob and the mafia.
Dude, it's such a wild rabbit hole because no one does.
Yeah.
Think about how many movies you've ever seen about Jewish mobsters. But we've seen hundreds of movies about the
Italians,
mafia.
Yeah.
They're all about the Italian mafia and a few about the Irish mafias.
Right.
And then you realize that, and this is where it's like, I'm not saying all Jewish people are in on some fucking conspiracy. I'm just saying that like there are natural incentives structures out there. And it only takes a few people to kind of like roll with some incentive structures. And Hollywood was very literally founded by a bunch of Jewish film producers that were being ostracized from the New York film spaces. Because at the time, back in like the 1900s, the center of film was in New York. And they were all like, no, Jews can't fucking work here. We don't want you here. Like, go away. And so all these Jewish film producers that wanted to make movies, they were like, well, fuck it. We'll just go found our own place. And they moved to California and founded Hollywood. And that's all, it's like all over Wikipedia. It's not secret history. That's not in any way controversial. LA to this day has the highest percentage of Jewish population of anywhere in the United States. Because it was this safe haven all of a sudden for Jewish people because Hollywood was founded by them. And so they naturally they have always been a major presence in Hollywood. And so it could just be a coincidence, but it's like glaringly obvious when you think about how many movies have been made about the Jewish mob and how many have been made about the Italian mafia. And most people don't realize that the Jewish mob had at least as much power as the mafia, if not more. Like Meyer Lansky is the one that is famous for having photos of J. Edgar Hoover going fellatio on his boy. And so Meyer Lansky was the one that allegedly had control over the FBI to keep the FBI on a leash during that whole 3-decade time period when organized crime went from a couple of street gangs to an international crime syndicate that's running liquor everywhere, and then that turns into drugs and prostitution, everything else. So it's they held so much power throughout that. And then they literally organized crime in America, the Jewish mob, they just sold a whole bunch of extra weapons and ammunitions and everything from World War II to all the people that were busy founding Israel. So like the organized crime, the Jewish mob in America was absolutely instrumental to the founding of Israel, because you can't found a country through war if you don't have weapons, right? The Haganah and Irgun and the Stern Gang, they were all armed by the Jewish mob.